Don't worry, nobody will remember your contributions anyway. The words slipped from Logan's mouth like poison wrapped in silk. I sat there staring at the severance agreement, 5 years of 70-hour weeks reduced to a single digital signature and a dismissive comment. My chest tightened, but I forced my expression to remain neutral. Professional to the end. That's who I was. Or at least who I thought I was. I rose from the chair, gripping the canvas tote that now carried the sum of my professional life, a plant, a photo of my sister's family, and a chipped coffee mug. I appreciate the opportunity, I murmured, my voice even. I could taste the metallic tang of humiliation on my tongue. That's me, Dana Whitaker, Senior Systems Engineer. Or former Senior Systems Engineer, as of 3 minutes ago. Logan Merritt, the charismatic CEO, didn't even bother to look up from his laptop. His hair was slicked back perfectly, catching the San Diego sunlight that streamed through the glass walls of his kingdom. He was already moving on, already forgetting me, the woman who had built the backbone of the company's technology. As I walked through the open office, I passed rows of engineers, bright-eyed, focused, oblivious. Some of them were working with my code at that very moment. Lines I had written in the quiet hours of the night when exhaustion blurred vision. But the thought of failure burned too hot to let me rest. I could still feel the sting of sweat dripping down my back from those early days in the dingy warehouse office, when the heat was suffocating, when we had no air conditioning but endless ambition. Heading out early, Thomas, one of the new hires, called from his desk. He had no idea what had just happened. Something like that, I replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I pressed the elevator button and glanced one last time at the office that had become my second home. A chill ran down my spine. Logan's words, "Nobody will remember your contributions," echoed louder than the hum of the servers, louder than the chatter of keyboards. He was wrong. Every blueprint, every architecture draft, every private shorthand in my documentation bore my fingerprints. My work wasn't just code. It was a language only I could truly speak. And I had kept the receipts. 3 weeks earlier, I had sensed the shift, the whispers behind closed doors, the sudden investor meetings that excluded me, the way Logan paraded Troy, the new consultant, like a prize stallion. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. Files were already with my attorney, Valerie Knowles. Version logs, architecture diagrams, emails showing my authorship. I hadn't known when the axe would fall, but I had known it was coming. Driving home, the California sun blinding on the windshield, I called Valerie. "I've been dismissed," I said simply. Her voice was calm, measured. "What are the terms?" 6 months severance. Standard NDA. Nothing about intellectual property beyond the employment contract. "Smart girl," Valerie said. "The files you sent me are solid. Let's meet tomorrow to discuss options." For the first time in years, I didn't wake to the shrill chime of Slack notifications. I let myself sleep until 9. I made pancakes, fluffy, golden, stacked high. I hadn't made pancakes since before the startup consumed me. And as I sat at my tiny kitchen table, fork in hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. When I arrived at Valerie's office the next day, she had my files spread across the conference table. Architecture diagrams inked with my shorthand version, control logs, time-stamped with my contributions, even the early prototype of the authentication system that had set Quantum Shift apart in the marketplace. "You've been meticulous," she said. "My father taught me to keep receipts," I replied. The ghost of him flickered in my mind, a brilliant engineer who had once designed a revolutionary battery system in the 90s, only to be pushed out of his own company when it went public. They scrubbed his name from every press release, erased his legacy. I had sworn I would never let that happen to me. Yet, here I was, 29 years old, déjà vu, tightening around my throat. "So," Valerie said, "what do you want to do with all this?" I stared at the papers, at the pieces of my life laid bare. "Nothing yet. But I want to be ready." Valerie nodded. "They'll come looking for you. Companies like this always do once they realize what they've lost." 3 weeks later, the prophecy came true. I was sitting in a beachside cafe, the smell of salt and espresso mingling in the air when my phone rang. Joseph Bryant, Quantum Shift's CTO. His voice was overly friendly, brittle. "Dana, How have you been? I let him talk, sipping my latte slowly. He wanted a quick consultation. The team couldn't decipher my architecture decisions. My shorthand, my private cipher, was impenetrable to them. I'm not sure that would be appropriate, I said smoothly. Look, Donna, we're willing to compensate you for your time. Logan may have been hasty. Hasty, I repeated, tasting the word, as if 5 years of my life could be swept away with a euphemism. The call ended with Joseph begging for help and me refusing politely. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text, "We can double your consultation rate. Please reconsider." I set the phone down. Let them stew. That evening, an email came from Ethan Wilson, a junior engineer I had mentored. His subject line: "You won't believe this. Inside Dana, everything's falling apart. Troy can't make sense of your authentication system. 3 clients reported major issues after the latest deployment. Logan's blaming the engineering team, but everyone knows it's because they can't understand your architecture. Joseph is in panic mode. Miss having you here." I stared at the screen, torn between pity and satisfaction. My colleagues were good people trapped in Logan's hubris, but I couldn't ignore the flicker of vindication warming my chest. Logan had told me no one would remember my contributions, yet here they were crumbling without me. And this was only the beginning. The emails kept coming. By the end of that week, 3 different engineers had reached out to me privately, their messages laced with desperation. "Dana, can you help me understand why the authentication fails under load?" Another wrote, "The investors are furious we can't replicate the demo environment you set up. Logan says it's our fault, but none of us can fix this without you." Every word was both a dagger and a balm. I ached for the team. The people who had once pulled all-nighters beside me, fueled by cold pizza and dreams of changing the world. But at the same time, a dark satisfaction pulsed through me. Logan had wanted me erased. Now he couldn't scrub my fingerprints no matter how hard he tried. That weekend, I drove up the coast to my father's cabin, the one sanctuary that had never been touched by boardrooms or politics. The pine trees rose tall and silent, the air crisp with salt from the Pacific. I carried the cedar box I'd taken from my apartment, a box filled with old notebooks, sketches, and one worn photo of my father standing in front of his lab in 1996, just before his partners forced him out. I lit a fire and sat with the photo, tracing the lines of his face with my thumb. My father, Leonard Whitaker, had been brilliant too. Brilliant for his own good. He had created a lithium-ion cell design that was years ahead of its time, but when the company smelled money, they pushed him aside. They told the world it had been a team effort. Within months, his name vanished from every patent filing, every article. By the time I was born, his work lived in their profits, not in his legacy. He used to say, "Dana, always keep receipts. They can't erase the truth if you hold it in your hands." I had kept that promise. My files were more than receipts. They were proof that Quantum Shift's very skeleton was mine. The architecture, the systems, the encryption ciphers, they all carried my signature. And now, watching them flounder, I realized something. I didn't just want them to acknowledge me. I wanted them to feel what my father had felt. The hollow echo of being dismissed, forgotten, discarded until the truth clawed its way back. On Monday morning, Valerie called. "I've been monitoring the filings. Investors are growing restless. 2 of them are considering pulling out if the product doesn't stabilize by next quarter." A slow smile crept across my face. "And they can't stabilize it without me." "Exactly," she said. "The question is, how do you want to play this lawsuit press exposure? Or wait until they come crawling back?" I hesitated. Lawsuits were loud, messy. Press exposure was dangerous. Logan had a golden tongue and knew how to spin a narrative, but waiting gave me control. "Not yet," I said. "Let them sweat. When they're desperate enough, they'll make mistakes. And when they do, I'll be ready." That evening, as I walked along the beach near my apartment, I remembered the first time I'd pitched with Logan. We were in a cramped co-working space, armed with little more than a PowerPoint and bravado. He had dazzled the investors with his charisma, painting visions of disruption and billion-dollar exits. I had been the quiet shadow beside him, the one who clicked through the slides, who answered the technical questions. At the time, I told myself it was fine. He was the showman, I was the builder. We needed each other. But as the years passed, his charisma became a mask to hide his emptiness, and my silence became a cage. Now the roles had reversed, he was unraveling and I was free. 2 weeks later it happened. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the voice on the other end was tight with panic. "Donna, this is Michelle Yates. I'm one of the Series B investors in Quantum Shift." I stopped walking. The ocean waves crashed against the shore, steady and relentless. "Yes, I wanted to reach out personally," she said. "We're concerned about the company's performance. We were told you parted ways. But from what I gather, your work underpins everything. Is that accurate?" I let the silence stretch, savoring the weight of her words. Finally, I said yes. "My systems are still running their core architecture, but I no longer have access to maintain them." Michelle sighed. "That explains a lot. Logan insists everything is fine, but the last demo was a disaster. Clients are threatening to walk. If you're willing, I'd like to meet." For the first time since being fired, I felt true power coursing through me. An investor was calling me, bypassing Logan entirely. "Of course," I said. "Name the time and place." The next day, I sat across from Michelle in a quiet cafe. She was sharp, her tailored suit immaculate, her eyes calculating. She didn't waste time. "I'll be direct. Logan's narrative is collapsing. We can't afford another quarter of instability. What will it take for you to step back in?" I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. "I'm not interested in being their savior. Not unless my role is acknowledged, secured, and protected. I won't be erased again." Michelle studied me for a long moment. "You sound like your father." The words startled me. "You knew him?" "I was an intern at his lab," she said softly. "I remember the day they forced him out. He deserved better. You deserve better." Tears pricked my eyes, but I held her gaze steady. "Then help me make sure history doesn't repeat itself." She nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can do." That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind a storm of memory and resolve. My father's voice whispered through me like the tide, "Keep receipts. Don't let them erase you." And I knew then I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for him too. Michelle kept her word. Within a week, whispers began rippling through the industry blogs. Quantum Shift's star was fading. The once untouchable startup darling of venture capital, poster child of next-gen disruption, was suddenly missing deadlines, fumbling demos, hemorrhaging clients. Logan scrambled to control the narrative, smiling through interviews, promising breakthroughs just around the corner. But the cracks were visible now, widening each day. I followed every headline, every rumor. Some nights I almost felt pity. Almost. Then I would remember the humiliation of standing in his office, tote bag in hand, as he dismissed me like a disposable cog, and pity would turn to steel. Michelle arranged another meeting, this time with 2 other Series B investors. We met in a private room in a downtown high-rise, glass walls overlooking the San Diego skyline. The city sparkled, but the atmosphere inside was taut with unease. "Dana," one of them said, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, "you built the core architecture. We know that now. What we need to know is, can the company survive without you?" I didn't soften the blow. "No. They're trying to untangle a system designed with layers of encryption, shorthand, and proprietary sequencing. I engineered it that way to be secure. But without my guidance, they're blind." The woman beside him leaned forward. "Would you consider returning? We'd compensate you, of course. Substantially." I shook my head. "Not as a consultant, not as a silent partner. If I return, it will be on my terms. My contributions recognized, my authority protected." "Logan will never agree to that," the man muttered. "Then Logan won't have a company," I replied. The room fell silent. They studied me, weighing my resolve. Finally, Michelle smiled faintly. "She means it, and honestly, I'd bet on her before I'd bet on Logan at this point." When I left that night, the city lights reflected in the glass elevator, I felt something like triumph stirring inside me. For years I had been the quiet one in the background. Now they were listening. To me. Meanwhile, Quantum Shift's unraveling accelerated. Ethan emailed me again, this time with a PDF attachment, an internal memo Logan had sent to the engineering team. It read like desperation. "All issues must be resolved before next investor call. No excuses. Failure is not an option." Ethan's note beneath it. "He's losing it, Dana. Everyone's terrified. Troy already bailed last week. Investors are circling. It's chaos here." I stared at the memo until the words blurred. Logan's empire, the one he had built on charisma, and my silence was collapsing under the weight of truth. And for once, I didn't need to lift a finger. But then the inevitable happened. Logan called me. His number flashed on my phone as I sat in my car outside a grocery store. My heart pounded, but I answered. Donna, he said, his voice honeyed but frayed. We need to talk. I said nothing. Let the silence stretch. I know things ended poorly, he continued, but the company's in a critical phase. We could use your expertise. I'd be willing to what I cut in my tone sharp. Pretend I never existed. Pay me to clean up your mess while you take the credit again. His charm faltered. That's not fair. Fair, I almost laughed. You told me nobody would remember my contributions. And now you're choking on them. He exhaled heavily. Look, name your price. We can work something out. I felt my father's photo heavy in my bag, his eyes staring back at me across decades. Keep receipts. Don't let them erase you. You can't afford my price, I said softly, then hung up. That night, I drove back to the cabin. I needed the silence, the whisper of pines, the crash of waves. I built a fire and opened the cedar box laying out my old notebooks. As I flipped through pages filled with code equations and scribbles of dreams, I realized I wasn't just holding proof. I was holding power. I wasn't going to let Logan dictate the terms anymore. I was going to dictate them. The next morning, Valerie and I drafted a proposal re-entry into Quantum Shift, but not as an employee. As CTO, equal equity, retroactive recognition in all filings, and a board seat. The investors would back me. Logan would have no choice. Are you ready for the war this will unleash? Valerie asked, sliding the draft across her desk. I met her eyes steady. I was born into it. Because this wasn't just about me. It was about my father erased from his legacy. It was about every builder overshadowed by someone else's charisma. It was about rewriting the story, not just mine, but his too. 2 weeks later, the board meeting was called. Investors pressed Logan, his smile faltering as they laid down the ultimatum: bring me back under the conditions outlined or watch their funding evaporate. I wasn't in the room, but I imagined his face, the flash of anger, the tightening jaw, the desperate scramble to regain control. For once it wouldn't work. It wouldn't. Later that night, Michelle called. He's furious, but he knows he has no choice. The board is siding with you. I sat in my apartment, the city glowing beyond the windows, my laptop open to the original lines of code I had written years ago. My fingerprints, my legacy. Logan's empire was built on my foundation, and now he would finally have to admit it. But beneath the triumph was a knot of fear. Power is never given freely, it's taken. And Logan wasn't the type to surrender quietly. The day of the board meeting dawned bright, but inside me storms brewed. I dressed carefully. Navy blazer, crisp white shirt, the necklace my father had given me when I graduated from Stanford, a small silver gear on a chain. You build things, he'd said. Don't let anyone take that from you. I arrived at the Quantum Shift headquarters, the building that had once felt like home, but now loomed like hostile territory. The receptionist glanced at me with surprise. Ms. Whitaker. I'm here for the board meeting, I said evenly. Inside the conference room, tension clung to the air like humidity before lightning. The long table was lined with investors, their laptops open, their gazes sharp. Michelle gave me a reassuring nod. Across from her sat Logan, radiating fury under his practiced smile. He looked polished, immaculate, but his eyes betrayed him, dark, restless, cornered. When I entered, his jaw tightened. What is she doing here? He demanded. One of the board members cleared his throat. Logan, we've already discussed this. Ms. Whitaker is here because her role is central to the future of this company. This is ridiculous, he snapped. She was an employee. She signed an NDA. Enough, Michelle cut in, her tone icy. Without Dana, your product is unraveling. Without Dana, clients are walking. Investors are preparing to withdraw. This isn't optional, Logan. He turned to me, his expression a mask of contempt barely holding together. So what is it you want? Dana? A pity title? A paycheck for doing nothing? A pat on the back for old code? I leaned forward, meeting his gaze steadily. What I want is recognition, equity, authority, retroactive acknowledgement of my role as co-founder, and a seat on this board. His laugh was sharp, brittle. Co-founder, you were a coder. You built what I told you to build. The investors stirred uncomfortably, but I didn't flinch. No, Logan. I built what you sold. Without me, there was nothing to pitch. Without me, your promises were empty air. I architected the backbone of this company. You dismissed me, tried to erase me. But the truth refuses to be erased. Michelle slid the contract across the table toward him. These are the terms. Sign or we begin the process of removing you as CEO. The silence was deafening. Logan's face darkened, rage burning beneath his skin. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up the pen. For a moment, I thought he might lunge across the table, tear the paper in two, anything to assert control. But then he saw the investors' faces, stern, resolute. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. He signed. I exhaled slowly, the sound of the pen scratching paper louder in my chest than any thunder. For the first time in years, I felt the weight shift. The scales were no longer tipped against me. The meeting ended quickly after that. Investors dispersed, murmuring plans already shifting focus to stabilization. Logan stayed seated, his knuckles white against the edge of the table. When the last person left, I lingered. It was just the two of us now, the air heavy with everything unspoken. You think this is a victory? He said, his voice low and venomous. But you'll regret it. Running a company isn't the same as hiding behind a computer. You don't have what it takes. I walked to the window, the city sprawling beyond us, glittering in the sun. Maybe. Maybe I'll stumble. Maybe I'll fail. But at least if I fall, it'll be on my own terms. Not because someone like you decided I didn't matter. He stood, his shadow stretching long across the conference table. You'll never be more than a footnote. I'll make sure of it. I turned back to him, my voice steady steel hidden in softness. You already tried. And yet here I am. For a moment his mask slipped completely. The arrogance, the charm, the polish all gone. What remained was desperation. He stormed past me, slamming the door behind him. I sank into a chair, my body trembling, adrenaline crashing through me. It was over, or at least the first battle was. I was CTO now, co-founder, in writing, my authority secured. But victories like this come with scars. And scars have a way of aching long after the fight is done. That night back at my apartment, I opened my father's cedar box again. Inside, his notebook smelled faintly of tobacco and old paper. I traced his handwriting, the equations he'd scribbled decades ago. They erased you, I whispered into the quiet, but they won't erase me. And for the first time, I believed it fully. The days after the board meeting blurred into long hours and sharp decisions. My inbox flooded with technical questions, project updates, client concerns. For the first time, my name appeared on every thread, not hidden in the CC field or scrubbed from the credit slide. CTO co-founder. Seeing those words next to mine felt surreal, like rewriting history while it was still unfolding. Logan sulked in silence. Though he remained CEO for now, his power was clipped. The investors watched him closely. Their faith cracked. At meetings, he plastered on his smile, but his eyes darted toward me like daggers, every word a battle he couldn't win. One evening, after a 12-hour stretch at headquarters, I drove to the cabin. The pines were whispering in the dusk, the lake shimmering with the last of the light. I carried my laptop and my father's cedar box to the porch. Fireflies blinked in the dark, a silent applause. I opened the box and took out his old notebook pages, yellowed with time. On one of them, scrawled in his rushed hand, were the words, "They can take your title. They can take your office. But they cannot take your mind." I pressed the page to my chest, tears stinging. For so long, I had feared becoming my father, brilliant, but erased, condemned to obscurity by greedier men. But here I was, his daughter, carrying his fire forward. His warning had become my shield. A week later, at an all-hands company meeting, I stood on the stage. Rows of faces stared up at me. Engineers, designers, marketers, the people who had once whispered doubts about my absence. Logan sat off to the side, stiff and resentful, his smile frozen. I told them the truth. About the architecture, about the foundation we had built together. About the importance of transparency, of remembering every voice, every contribution. My voice cracked at times, but I didn't hide it. Vulnerability was not weakness, it was proof I had survived. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. Not polite applause, real, thunderous, sustained. Some of the engineers I had mentored were crying. Ethan caught my eye and mouthed welcome back. Logan left the room before it ended. Later that night, Michelle called. The investors are preparing a transition. Logan's days as CEO are numbered. He'll fight, of course, but the tide has turned. I thanked her, though I felt no triumph, only a steady, quiet certainty. Power wasn't about titles or press releases. Power was about truth, the kind that endures when lies collapse. 2 weeks later, Logan resigned. The press spun it as a strategic shift, but inside the company, everyone knew the truth. His empire had been built on my silence, and the moment I found my voice, it crumbled. The morning after his resignation, I walked into the office and saw my name on the glass wall of the executive suite, Dana Whitaker, CTO co-founder. I touched the letters cold under my fingertips and felt a warmth spread through me. Not pride alone, something deeper. Vindication. That weekend, I drove back to the cabin one more time. I lit a fire in the hearth, opened my laptop, and drafted a letter to myself. You did not let them erase you. You did not become a ghost in someone else's story. You built, you fought, you endured, and now you are seen. I folded the letter and placed it in the cedar box alongside my father's notes. Our voices together spanning decades, bound by the refusal to disappear. Sitting by the fire, I realized revenge was not in watching Logan fall. It was in reclaiming my name, my worth, my legacy. It was in standing tall, scars and all, in saying I am still here. And if you're listening, if you've ever been cast aside, told you were invisible, made to believe your work didn't matter, let my story remind you the truth has weight. Keep your receipts, hold your ground, and never ever let them erase you.